Spider-Man 2 is a masterpiece. Almost. Now, Spider-Man PS4 is one of my favorite games of all time. I still remember the first time I booted that game up and just spent hours swinging around New York, beating up criminals and feeling like my life had peaked. It would never get better than this. The game had really exciting traversal, fun combat, amazing music, and one of the best Spider-Man stories ever told. This game was emotional, and for a lifelong Spider-Man fan, it was perfect. However, it wasn't without its flaws that were easy to ignore because of how great everything else was, but flaws nonetheless. However, this is where the long-anticipated sequel could come in and rectify those flaws and just be better in every way. However, sequels don't always live up to the hype. They sometimes fall flat, and there was a lot of pressure on Insomniac Games, and despite being one of the most talented game developing teams we have today, sometimes pressure doesn't make diamonds. However, is this what happened to Spider-Man 2? The short answer is Spider-Man 2 is phenomenal. It's everything a sequel should be. It's bigger, it's better, and it improves upon pretty much every aspect of the first game. Just a heads up, for most of this video there won't be any major spoilers for the main story, and once I actually get into spoilers, I'll give you all a warning. Now, some people bought this game and finished it within the first couple of days, and they're all feeling that post-game depression. And listen, I thought about doing the same thing. I was tempted to just storm through the game like I did with the last one. Perhaps I'd be able to get my video out during peak hours and get more views. However, I wanted to take my time with it, explore every aspect of it and not just rush through the story, despite being very gripped by the story the whole way through. But it's safe to say that this is not a long game. Compared to Baldur's Gate 3 or Starfield that have the potentials for 100-hour playthroughs, Spider-Man 2 instead boasts a solid 15-hour story on average, with anywhere between 20 to 30 hours to 100% completed, depending of course on your playstyle and your skill level. However, it focuses more on creating spectacle. It's not a 100+ hour RPG, but it's instead a cinematic experience with features that just work really well and are insanely fun. And the cinematic nature of this game comes to life wonderfully because it's a technical marvel. This game fully utilizes the PS5, probably the first mainstream game to truly do so. Of course, not taking into account a couple of other titles. However, this game truly feels next gen, and the team deciding to just not make this game for the PS4 was absolutely the right choice, because Spider-Man 2 could not run on a PS4. If we compare this game to God of War Ragnarok, which is by all means also a phenomenal sequel that does things bigger and better than the first game, it still doesn't truly feel next generation. And part of that is due to also being released on the PS4, where the main differences are graphics and loading times, which don't fundamentally change the game. Spider-Man 2 on the other hand takes full advantage of the PS5's SSD and all the other better components, because the traversal here is insane. Sure, the graphic fidelity is really impressive, but other games have impressive graphics as well. But the way you just soar through the skies at high speeds in this game, and so much more density in the cars and the people, making the city really feel alive. While all of this is being rendered so quick and it all just runs smoothly. It's so fucking satisfying. The introduction of web wings, air tunnels, and slingshots truly make going back to the PS4 games such a difficult time, because you move so much slower. The traversal back then was awesome, don't get me wrong, but this is truly just a step up, and once again, just swinging around the city is one of the best parts of the game. So much so that even though there's an insanely quick fast travel mechanic, I found myself rarely ever using it, because the traversal is so much fun. But the PS5 also allows for the seamless switching between Miles and Peter, and being able to just randomly see the other Spider-Man during encounters is so cool. The scale and epicness of the set pieces will also just blow your mind. That opening sequence with minor spoilers, Sandman, hooked me right from the start, and it just got better and better throughout the story. However, enough raving about how great the new generation of consoles are. Let's take a look at combat, which has also seen a significant improvement. The combat is now fundamentally the same as the first one. Peter and Miles know Kung Fu or whatever, and they have gadgets and web shooters. They each have their own skill trees with some options for customization. They each have their own unique Venom abilities, and overall, while the combat definitely still has room for improvement for the next game, it just feels more dynamic and intense than the first game. There are more enemy varieties, still not that many, but it's an improvement. And there are some new aspects of combat, such as parrying, which adds some more depth. However, one of my major issues with the first game was the boss fights just not really being that engaging. challenging. They weren't really difficult at all. The mechanics were basic and often just the same as each other, but that's not really the case here. Sandman is a bit like that, which makes sense. That fight is supposed to just be cinematic, but the rest of the major boss fights in the main story and the side content are really fun. They have more diverse and challenging movesets, there are multiple stages to the fights, and honestly, they're at times difficult, which I was really fucking happy about. Spider-Man PS4 felt way too easy, even on the highest difficulty. And while this game doesn't have nearly the same amount of challenge as say Ghost of Tsushima or God of War, and definitely not Dark Souls, on the highest difficulty there were some boss fights and enemy encounters that required significant concentration to beat. Naturally, if challenging gameplay is a priority for you, then this still isn't the game for you, but for the people who love the story, the swinging around, the music, the cinematic marvel, but who also enjoy some challenge, I think they've done a good job here. And speaking of the music, it's once again phenomenal. The seamless mixing of Peter and Miles' themes to create this beautiful masterpiece is incredible, and swinging around with music like this truly makes you feel like Spider-Man. But also just some of the music used throughout the game for some quieter and more intimate moments really hit home, like during a Peter and Harry scene in the beginning, and during a conversation with an old man during a side quest.
Battery Park. Nice memorials and stuff to poop on. Howard wanted you guys to see the world though.
And speaking of side quests, this game doesn't have that many concrete side missions, but the ones it does have actually surprised me quite a lot. I'm sure some of you have seen the one with the old man in Central Park being raved about, but it truly was a heartwarming moment that I wasn't expecting. At first I thought this was just another tedious side mission like most of the ones from the first game, having to find some person's grandpa who had gone missing in the park. But after some tedious gameplay, the conversation you have with the man on the bench overlooking the lake was surprisingly beautiful, and there are a few side missions like these scattered around the game. Also a really sad one involving a character from the last game. However, both Miles and Peter also have their own dedicated side quest. Peter's is a lot better, it's a direct continuation of one of the main relationship dynamics from the first game, and it had one of my favorite boss fights and an awesome teaser for the next game, but Miles' quest was still really fun. However, I've spoken very highly of the game so far, but is it really just a perfect game? I think it again has some flaws that, depending on who you are and the type of games you like, could be pretty significant. For one, while the open world is bigger and more improved overall, it's still limited by the Ubisoft style collectathons. You will have a handful of rinse and repeat activities to complete that, once you complete them, either reward you with a fun Easter egg, a new suit, and occasionally some actual story. They are more fun and engaging in terms of uniqueness and diversity of tasks compared to the first game, and having to locate these activities in the open world for them to show up on the map instead of just being there from the start is a better design. Some of these tasks are more exciting gameplay wise, for example the Mysteriums and chasing the mechanic birds, but some are just incredibly tedious. I would have of course preferred a more nuanced open world filled with unique side content similar to Arkham City, but this definitely isn't the worst thing I've ever seen. Some people are absolutely going to love this, doing all these tasks, getting materials for upgrades and new suits, and since the traversal in combat is so fun, it doesn't really feel as much of a chore to complete all of them as say Spider-Man PS4 did. Definitely not as tame or boring as Ubisoft games themselves. Now another potential issue someone could have with the game is once again the MJ missions. Before I get serious, I just want to say that the people making a big fuss over MJ's looks, calling her ugly, are just incredibly pathetic. Attractiveness is an incredibly subjective thing, and getting pissy over the women in your video game not looking exactly how you want them to is just so childish. Anyways, I think MJ's missions are a huge step up compared to the first game, which I honestly didn't think were that bad. They just weren't that interesting gameplay wise, and they did drag the pacing down just a little, but they're much improved here. MJ is a lot more capable, she has a taser that gets upgraded every time we play as her to keep up the variety, and honestly her sections feel at times like something out of The Last of Us, just not as complex of course. Her final section in particular was actually pretty fun, and her best section is by far, minor spoiler, when you're being chased by the symbiote Peter. That shit was intense. Overall, I think MJ's sections can get a little tedious and slow down the pacing of an already short story, and for many this will be annoying. Personally, however, I didn't mind the sections. They weren't my favorite sections, but I like MJ and I was really into her arc in this game. So a few slow sections just didn't ruin the experience for me, but I can absolutely see it being a potential issue for some people. However, we still haven't spoken about the main event, the reason we all bought this game. other than getting the chance to be Spider-Man, of course, and it's the main story. And now we're getting into some spoiler territory. Now, I was itching to see how this game would play out. I mean, they sold me very well with Kraven and Venom and the Black Suit Peter being a menace, and since the first game told one of my favorite Spider-Man stories to date, I had high hopes. And did Spider-Man 2 live up to those high expectations? Yes. Yes, it did. I must say, this story isn't as emotional or intimate as the first one, and on a pure focus on just a narrative alone, I think I prefer the first one. However, this story just exceeds in terms of scale, epicness, and absolutely batshit craziness. This story feels like it's ripped right out of all the best Spider-Man comics, and it really goes to show that Insomniac just gets Spider-Man. They understand what makes these characters so special, and even if they sometimes put their own spin on things, they always retain the essence of what makes Spider-Man so awesome. This is not to say that the story didn't have emotional moments, it certainly did, and they were awesome, but the main draw here is definitely just the bombastic nature of the story. And the beginning of the game being centered around the aftermath of Sandman and Kraven's introduction, the middle section being about the fight with Kraven and the symbiote, and then finally the ending being centered around Venom, with the personal and intimate stories of all the characters being weaved in between. Just made for a really satisfying adventure. And both Spider-Man were also just handled really well, which I'll get to in a minute. But I think this game definitely could have been a little longer. Listen, I'm not one of those people saying that this game needed to be 30 to 40 hours long. I'm perfectly fine with a 15 to 20 hour game that does the story right and adds a lot of spectacle. And this game definitely does that. However, I also wouldn't have been opposed to having just a bit more time to flesh out these characters a bit more. I mean, this game and the first one are basically the same length, and the first one didn't have two main characters to juggle with. And I think this game does a surprisingly good job of it, but more time definitely wouldn't have hurt. A longer runtime also could have given more time for the final act, because the third act is a little rushed at times, and I think there were a couple of missed opportunities regarding Venom. Both us playing as Venom, which was awesome, but could have been nice to have a bit more of that, and then potentially having more than one extended boss fight with him. Perhaps a chase scene of some kind, or like a beatdown of Peter, I don't know. Just a bit more involving Venom. However, this is on a gameplay side of things. From a story perspective, I think they fucking nailed Venom. I like how he was both menacing and powerful, but also having the emotional aspect of him being Harry, and Peter's conflict of trying to juggle saving his best friend and saving the world. Everything from Venom going after MJ, which led to one of the coolest boss fights with fucking Scream of all villains, and a great payoff to Peter and MJ's arcs, to also weaving in Miles in a really sound way. I was afraid that Miles was going to feel like a side character in this story, a story that is very focused on Peter's side of things. I mean, the plot often moves forward based on Peter and his relationships. But I'm happy to say that Miles had a lot of room to shine. He saved Peter from the symbiote, he saves Martin Lee, and helps him become a reformed person, something that Peter admits he has never been able to do, which is really powerful and makes Peter that much surer in his decision to take a break from being a Spider-Man. Miles also saves Harry at the end, and it feels like he's finally completed his arc that was set up from the moment his dad died in the first game. Miles Morales is Spider-Man through and through, he's a hero, and his ending is honestly just as satisfying as Peter's. Peter wanting to take some time off, focus on his relationship with MJ, and work on the Emily May Foundation, while MJ starts her podcast and Miles officially takes the mantle as Spider-Man, hit me right in the feels. I have no qualms about the ending of this story, and while nothing to me will truly top the first game's narrative and the intimate and emotional payoff of that story, I can confidently say that Spider-Man 2 is a masterpiece. The story is epic, it's fucking bonkers. The scale and epicness of it completely dwarfs the first game, and while it's not as emotional as the first game, it still has enough tear-jerking scenes and intimate character moments that I would recommend this game to any Spider-Man fan, and any fan who's looking for a batshit crazy comic booky and satisfying Spider-Man game, and also just anyone who loves story-driven video games. And while the game has some pretty significant flaws if you care about the side content a lot in a game like this, I still think that what this game does well completely outshines the negatives, for me at least. And so while this isn't the case for everyone, I believe that Spider-Man 2 is a masterpiece. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want more video essays about video games, then let me know by hitting the like button and letting me know down in the comments. I play a lot of video games and would love to make more gaming related content if you guys want it. Be sure to check out my channel memberships, it would greatly help me out. And lastly, what are your thoughts on Spider-Man 2? I can't wait to read your comments down below, but other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, stay safe, and peace out.